Hey, how are you? I'm SliceofOtaku, and Infinity Train has single-handedly renewed my faith in Cartoon Network. Which isn't to say the network doesn't have any good shows left, but rather that they don't always do good by their shows. Steven Universe, for instance, being a series plagued by artificial hiatuses, and OKKO having been abruptly cancelled, with the crew behind it only having concluded their work a literal week before the series finale, which Cartoon Network refuses to officially acknowledge. And so with all that in mind, Infinity Train and its associated presentation felt very different. And it's of course a no-brainer that having its pilot become as widely popular as it did helped its case. But rather than attempting to milk this series for all it's worth, which really wouldn't have been hard to expect, Infinity Train is currently a 10-part miniseries which I feel completely portrays the crew's unadulterated artistic vision. And I say this because to me, Infinity Train is an animated therapy session, and I love every minute of it. Every single one of these episodes teaches our main protagonist, Tulip, a lesson. And admittedly, the moment I became privy to this trend, I felt a bit concerned that it may at some point get a bit corny or stale, but the way in which we traverse from problem to problem is so seamless and unique that all those doubts were gone before I knew it. And I think that's because Tulip is such a believable character. With the series so deeply ingrained in the fantastic and unexplained, the realism of Tulip and her issues very much becomes our anchor. I mean, she can literally be described as a 13-year-old redhead girl from Wisconsin, currently dealing with the divorce of her parents and coding her own computer game, which could very much serve to describe a real person as well. And you know, generally speaking, in most cases, entertainment, and more specifically animated entertainment, typically serves as a means of escapism, a way for audience members to engross themselves in worlds and situations unlike their own, which may be especially true when it comes to media primarily tailored towards children, as vibrant colors, anthropomorphic creatures, and tales of adventure are a tried and true formula for grabbing their attention. However, some of the best shows out there are the ones that may appeal to people of all ages, and Infinity Train does just that. And right now, in our current time, mental health is treated more seriously than ever, as it impacts so many of us today. And that applies to people of all ages. Now, Tulip's Alice in Wonderland-like adventures serve to bring her to terms with her own feelings towards the divorce of her parents, which, when it comes to relatability, is nothing short of brilliance. With divorce being such a commonality in our society, this sort of subject matter is sure to touch the hearts of both those who may have already experienced its implications, as well as those who are currently in the process of it all. And that goes both ways, for the children turned casualties by the battles of their parents, and even for the parents who may not entirely recognize the impact of their choices. And although there are plenty of childhood issues or traumas they could have chosen to hone in on, the subject of divorce is a safe one, and one that wouldn't necessarily need to be watered down for publication. With episode 1, Tulip begins somewhat reluctant to return home, as it no longer serves to represent a safe familial environment for her, and is now just a reminder of what was. And her friend Michaela, not knowing how exactly to tread when it comes to this whole thing, sort of struck a nerve for Tulip, who is obviously even more confused. She attempts to rationalize and downplay things by rebutting that plenty of people have divorces and that it's not that strange. But simply knowing your problem is a common one doesn't necessarily make them any easier to bear, especially when there is no one for you to relate to. And Tulip is an only child. Now, when she does go inside, she's quick to avoid her mother and darts immediately to her room. A sequence of events I'm sure plenty of us have executed at some point or another. What's more is that her fascination with video games, albeit on the developmental side of things, is something even more of us may relate to, which calls back to the whole immersion thing, as by focusing on coding as much as possible, she's able to avoid thinking about her current situation, making it a sort of safe place for her. And so when her plans of going away to game design camp are taken from her, she is distraught, And the fact that her parents caused this as well only makes things worse, as she couldn't help but feel like an afterthought. And when she ran back up to her room, she briefly looks up at an old family photo, reminiscing on the past. And out of frustration, she throws caution to the wind and goes off on her own. With episode 2, we have Tulip's refusal of change, which comes out when she notices the number on her hand do so, saying, "Nobody told me this number was going to change. Nobody said anything," which I feel is a clear reflection of her feelings towards her parents' separation. She wasn't prepared for all this, and how could she? And because of this, she certainly felt alone, which in turn very much shifted her mentality towards that of self-preservation. She kept from her parents as a means of avoiding further emotional damage, and was willing to give away one if it meant getting off the train. Her anxiety peaked the moment she considered the number on her hand to be a countdown to her own demise. And it's that negative thinking and fear of the unknown that brought something out of her that she really didn't like. She took advantage of one's obliviousness and felt horrible about it. Randall wasn't even saying anything of relevance to her predicament, but she felt it nonetheless because of how guilty she felt. And that's because she is a good person. She's just caught in a bad circumstance. But rather than giving up and saying it is what it is, she recognizes that she was wrong and does something about it. Not only going out of her way to save One, but also to retrieve his gift, which she previously gave away. Episode 3 presented us with Tulip going about things in a different way. She treated things as a speedrun rather than taking her time to work things out, but ultimately learns to give her problems their due diligence and just how important patience can be. Not only that, but with the addition of Atticus to their party, Tulip gets what is essentially a therapy dog, as he does a splendid job of helping her when she feels the most overwhelmed. Not to mention, he is hilarious and makes me want a dog even more than I already do. By the time episode 4 rolled around, we had at that point seen Tulip display sudden outbursts of aggression numerous times, which is to be expected when one continuously represses their own strong emotions and can become really dangerous, especially if not dealt with early on. However, in order for her to progress onwards, she's made to reflect by means of a song that is of emotional significance to her. And what comes to mind isn't something sad, somber, or hostile, it's cheesy, and what she considered to be a bit embarrassing, as it is a song that she would sing with her parents on road trips. A simple hallmark of a better time. A feeling she now desperately longs for, which was actually the first time we as the audience were able to see for ourselves things were actually happy at times, as pictures can only tell you so much, making this really important for our further connection to Tulip's character. Now, episode 5 was major. It provided us with ample amounts of progression and insight in regards to her parents separating, and was just exquisitely done. Like seriously, this episode in particular should be in the running for some awards because it is just that good. In this episode, Tulip is made to reflect on her own memories and very much finds comfort in them. And even when things begin to seem a bit off, the moment she saw a representation of her and her parents being a happy family, she eased up yet again, because this is how she believes things should be. Both of her parents available and paying attention to her. Not to mention their shirts that read "Family Forever." But things are too perfect here, and she knows that. This couldn't possibly be right, because otherwise, why would they be splitting up? And man, I think the way in which they indicated this discrepancy is not only eerie, but so telling. The uncomfortable smile her mother bears is fraudulent. It's there to mask her unhappiness, which is exactly what her parents would be doing by staying together. But that's not fair, and this isn't right, so Tulip rejects it. And when that happens, she's then able to see the static progressively consuming her. And I think static is a perfect representation here as well. And now, once again, she finds herself within a memory she previously found comfort in. But in coming to terms with reality, acknowledges that this too was nothing more than a fallacy. Because rather than being the happy family trip that she initially remembered and may have been believed according to the picture from episode 1, it really wasn't a great memory as her parents were fighting. And it certainly doesn't help that the argument stemmed from a remark she herself made. And just looking at the body language of a younger Tulip here, to me at least, it's pretty clear that she's sort of accustomed to this and instinctually opts to block it out, which would explain the repression which led to this illusion of the past to begin with. But by recognizing this for herself, the static begins to recede. With that, she begins recounting the same sequence of events as earlier, but this time with clear eyes, as she now recalls a low point for her father and her subsequent comforting of him, which is something she didn't want to remember because ignorance is bliss, although fictitious and remiss. Now, the scene after this is overtly aggressive in its attempt to further torment her, as her parents become hellish, using their divorce as if to punish her. And for a moment, Tulip begins to slip and question if there may be truth to this as well, as indicated by the static now overcoating her more than ever. But she stabilizes and rebukes this as well, bringing us to something more so grounded in reality, albeit more than likely even more painful. Tulip then recounts her parents conveying their separation to her. And the moment our witnessing Tulip recognizes this, we see her slowly back away and begin to take up less space, closing up into herself. Now, when her parents begin to speak, Tulip at the time was clearly avoidant. And simply reading the room, I'm sure a part of her knew what was coming, and that immediately triggered her fight or flight mentality, of which she chose the latter. And seeing this fruitless attempt of avoidance, our witnessing Tulip couldn't help but cringe. And up to this point, she still perceived this moment to be one of inherent evil or negativity, as the flames had still yet to subside. But when her parents began to become more direct, they died down and the static begins to lower as she's now beginning to attentively listen and observe. And oh my gosh, I really can't get enough of the subtle body language in this scene and just the show overall. Seeing Tulip's past self look away begrudgingly at the mention of her parents fighting and her clutching of a napkin due to the cementation of their departure from one another is just so real. And it's at this time that her father asks if she's okay, which she quickly responds to with a lie, followed by a question, "Are you getting divorced?" Which was super on character and sort of relatable to myself in particular, using rationalization as a means of detachment to an otherwise very emotional issue. And while doing this, she begins tearing away at the napkin she once clutched, which is one of the simplest, yet realest things I have seen in animation in a long time. Which as an act is admittedly a bit difficult for me to completely explain, but if you've been there, like I have, then you know. And it's then that our witnessing Tulip recounts her feelings of fear, anger, and solitude. And after that, we see another outburst of raw emotions as Tulip exclaims that things were fine, but then you decided to change everything. Which isn't exactly the truth, but is a sentiment which certainly fueled her own delusions. And by now, recognizing all of this, the static then completely dissipated, and she was set free, which all served to be a major turning point for Tulip's character development, and may be considered to be her acceptance of her problems, a necessary step towards recovery and progression. In fact, Episode 6 sees a far more sensible Tulip, leveling with a distraught 1-1, giving him advice based on her own experiences, hammering home that you can't simply blame yourself for problems beyond your control, that you can't always fix things, and that to bear that sort of unwarranted responsibility can at times only make things worse for not only yourself, but everyone, which is no doubt quite the mature sentiment and contrast from earlier on. And now, this might just be me, but at the point of episode 7, I began to wonder if there was a song worth attributing to each episode, as with the first one, Home is Where the Hatred Is by Gil Scott-Heron immediately came to mind. And now with episode 7 and its focus on mirrors, I can't help but consider Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. But anyways, what I gleaned from this episode were feelings of childhood vulnerability, with Mirror Tulip acting as the child in this case. Now, as a child, in the vast majority of cases, you are essentially shackled to your parents. We are born dependent, which over time may become increasingly restrictive, which is precisely why Mirror Tulip so desperately desires her own freedom and individual identity. And I'm sure many of us have longed for adulthood for similar reasons at some point of our childhood. However, in recognition that we as humans are born dependent on others, communication is integral to our own survival, which is to say that it is okay to ask for help. Although it may at times feel alien or uncomfortable, it is perfectly normal and healthy to seek the aid of others. And that's precisely what the two of them do, as they cannot open the door nor both exit without the aid of one another. Then we have episode 8. And this one really took the whole calm before the storm thing to a new level. But during this calm, Tulip actually expresses an interest in returning home as opposed to going to camp, seemingly with desires of confronting her issues head on. However, the downside to her now recognizing the severity of her issues is that she feels it is her cross to bear alone, and questions if she's only hindering those around her because of it. To which Atticus immediately shuts down, as she isn't a burden to him whatsoever, and that it's quite the contrary, as without her, he couldn't have possibly come so far. But more than anything, he greatly values her as his friend and will remain loyal to her throughout it all. But, as I'm sure you already know, things take a turn for the worst in this episode, allowing the conductor to hone in on Tulip's insecurities and brand her as a catalyst to the demise of those around her, which is so sad, because all of that progression will have felt like nothing in the face of despair such as this. However, Tulip's journey has yet to conclude, and I think this in of itself serves to convey a powerful message as well. You will hit walls. You will suffer at times, and it may certainly feel like all of your efforts are for naught. But you have to persevere in the face of adversity. The final line of this episode, imparted by One is just so good. It's okay to cry, which I'm sure is not only a convention to Tulip, but also us as the audience who have fallen in love with the mighty Atticus. With episode 9, Tulip is just about ready to give up entirely, and the moment she begins to walk backwards, her number begins to climb once more so than ever, associating her disbelief in change with the increase of her number. Now, when the cat attempts to bargain with her, rather than answering cruelty with cruelty and leaving her be, Tulip takes the high ground and helps the cat, expecting nothing in return, which may not be much to her, but really does say a lot about her as a person, especially considering her actions were uncalculated in this instance. However, if it means a chance at saving her friend, she's willing to take a chance and have faith in someone she detested. And now, once the conductor's tape concluded, Tulip, being the genuinely good-natured person she is, despite knowing the conductor to be her adversary and someone who's wrought pain onto those she holds dear, truly felt for the conductor and related to her loss, simultaneously recognizing her own issues in their entirety. And with that, her purpose on the train was fulfilled, and her door opened, as a number on her hand hit 0. However, even with the promise of freedom, she refused to leave Atticus behind in such a state, which literally exceeded the standards to which the train operated, and stands to be yet another testament to her progression. And lastly, with episode 10, the finale of the first season, Tulip, despite having fought for her life against the conductor only moments ago, attempts to comfort her and urges her to look beyond her despair. And really, had Tulip shut down entirely at any point along her journey, she could have ended up along the very same path. And the conductor's ever-climbing number may serve as a display of just how far removed one may become from reality upon their complete refusal of change or their circumstances. But inversely, with the recognition of the issues which plagued her, when Tulip returned home, she returned a better, more accepting and adaptive person, and was able to find a sort of happiness she would have never been able to presume prior. To me, Infinity Train is a storytelling marvel, and although I'm sure I've used the word relatable plenty of times throughout this video, it really is just that for so many people, including myself. Now, I can't exactly relate to Tulip's situation, as the separation of my parents occurred before I could even know any different, but those many feelings she'd kept within herself, as well as the ways in which she decided to deal with them all, both healthy and otherwise, are ones I recognize to be familiar. But really, for anyone who has ever experienced emotional turmoil at any point of their life, should be able to connect with some part of this, and I think that's splendid storytelling. All in all, the show is an absolute delight, and my hat goes off to Owen Dennis and the entire crew behind it. I really hope you guys enjoyed season 1 of the show as much as I did, and that this video was enjoyable for you as well. And if you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to know what moments you related to the most. And as a side note, this year I'll be attending New York City Comic-Con yet again, and I'm really looking forward to seeing a bunch of my friends again and just having a bunch of fun as always. And I'd love to be able to see some of you guys as well. I'll be at the convention each of the 4 days, so if you're coming, let me know, and you can always keep up with me over on Twitter or Instagram if you'd like. Thank you all so much for watching, and have an awesome day. I love you.